The city of Los Angeles was waking up to a beautiful morning with the sun shining brightly down on the busy streets and the tall palm trees swaying gently in the warm breezite. Was a perfect day to be out and about, especially if you were someone who appreciated the feeling of freedom or the beauty of a well-built machine. Keanu Reeves stepped out of a small coffee shop holding a simple paper cup and took a deep breath of the fresh air. Was not dressed like a famous movie star that day, because he never really did prefer comfort and practicality over expensive fashion. Wore a worn-out leather jacket that had clearly seen better days, and a pair of faded blue jeans with a simple gray t-shirt underneath us. Boots were old and scuffed from years of walking and riding motorcycles on rough terrain. Looked just like any other person on the street, someone you might pass by without a second glance or a thought. Bet there was a certain calmness about him, a kind of peaceful energy that made him seem different if you looked closely enough. Decided to take a slow walk down the famous boulevard, where the high-end car dealerships were lined up. One after another, like museums for the wealthy. It was a place where dreams were sold and where the smell of money was almost as strong as the smell of new leather and high-octane gasoline. Keanu always loved cars and motorcycles, not because they were status symbols to show off to other people, but because of the pure engineering and the feeling of freedom they gave him. Had been thinking for a while about getting a new vehicle, something simple but reliable that he could use for his daily drives around the city and maybe for a long road. Triff walked past a few dealerships with their floor-to-ceiling glass windows and the bright lights shining on the polished hoods of fast sports cars. Funnily, he stopped in front of a dealership that looked particularly fancy and expensive. Here were red velvet ropes out front and a perfectly manicured lawn leading up to the large automatic glass doors. Took a sip of his coffee and walked towards the entrance with his hands in his pocket sauce. Soon as he stepped inside, the atmosphere changed completely. Air conditioning was blasting cool air that smelled like expensive cologne and fresh car. Waxed floor was so shiny and black that he could see his own reflection in it. As he walked, there were beautiful cars everywhere. Shiny red Ferraris, sleek black Porsches, and massive silver SUVs that looked like they could drive over anything. Dealership was buzzing with active salesmen and expensive tailored suits were walking around with confident smiles on their faces. They were shaking hands with customers who were wearing diamond watches and designer clothes. Everyone looked rich and important and acted like they owned the place. Keanu walked in, slowly taking it all in with a quiet sense of wonder. He did not walk with the arrogance of someone who owned the place or the nervousness of someone who did not belong, just walked with a humble curiosity. Started to wander through the rows of cars, looking at the engines through the open hoods and admiring the curves of the bodywork. Was not there to cause trouble or to make a sin. He was just a man who appreciated good machinery and hard worker. If ever the staff did not see it that way, he looked at his clothes and his old boots and immediately made a judgment about who he was to them. He looked like someone who had wandered in off the street just to cool down in the air conditioning or to look at cars he could never afford in a million years. So a group of salesmen were standing near the entrance, whispering to each other and laughing. They watched him walk by, but none of them made a move to help him. Own salesman, who was wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, looked Keanu up and down with a visible sneer on his face. I turned his back on him and continued talking to a customer who was holding a leather briefcase. Keanu did not seem to notice the cold shoulder or the rude looks. Was too busy looking at a vintage car that was parked on a rotating platform in the center of the room. Walked around it, admiring the lines and the color of the paint. Stood there for a few minutes just enjoying the moment and appreciating the design, but eventually he wanted to know more about the vehicle. Looked around for someone to talk to. Saw a young salesman near the back who looked new and a little nervous. Keanu started to walk towards him, hoping to ask a few questions, but before he could get there, another salesman stepped in front of him, blocking his path. It was Victor, the head salesman, who was known for being aggressive and for caring only about the biggest commissions. Victor looked at Keanu with a look of pure disgust, did not see a potential customer, saw a waste of his time. The interaction was about to begin, and neither of them knew how it would end. Other customers continued to sip their espresso and talk loudly about their stock portfolios, unaware of the drama that was About to unfold, Keanu stood there with his hands in his pockets, waiting to be acknowledged like a human. Banked sunlight from the windows reflected off the cars, creating patterns of light on the wall set, was a beautiful setting for something that was about to turn very ugly. Victor straightened his tie and prepared to speak his body language. Screaming arrogance and superiority had decided that this man in the worn-out jacket was not worth his effort, and he was going to make sure Keanu knew. Thoughts. Contrast between the two men could not have been more striking. One was dressed in the finest clothes money could buy, but had an ugly attitude. Other was dressed in simple, humble clothes, but possessed a kindness and dignity that money could not buy. The stage was set for a confrontation that would leave everyone in the room shocked, but for now, the dealership hummed with the sound of quiet luxury and unspoken judgment. Keanu took a deep breath and prepared himself for whatever was coming. Had dealt with difficult people before, and he knew that staying calm was always the best option. Looked Victor in the eye and waited silence between them, stretched out heavy with tension. Victor was not going to make this ease. It was going to make sure Keanu felt small and unwelcome. That was exactly what he intended. Two-tooth silence between the two men, stretched out heavy and uncomfortable like a thick fog that refused to lift. Victor stood with his arms crossed over his chest, looking down at the man in the worn-out jacket with a look of pure disdain. Did not offer a greeting or a friendly smile. Instead, he let out a loud and exaggerated sigh that made it perfectly clear he thought he was wasting his time. Looked Keanu up and down slowly, his eyes lingering on the old boots and the faded leather jacket, as if he were looking at something unpleasant that he needed to scrape off the bottom of his shoe. Finally, Victor broke the silence, but his words were not welcoming. Asked Keanu what he thought he was doing in a place like Thisha's voice was loud and sharp, carrying easily across the quiet showroom to the ears of the other customers. It was a voice used to giving orders and demanding respect. Keanu did not react with anger or embarrassment, simply stood his ground and replied in a soft and calm voice that he was just looking at the car. Gestured towards a sleek black sedan that was parked on a raised platform near the large glass window. It was a beautiful machine with clean lines and a powerful presence. Keanu asked if he could know the price of that specific model. Victor laughed. It was not a genuine laugh of joy, but a cruel and mocking sound that seemed to bounce off the wall. Looked around at his colleagues as if to share a private joke at the customer. Expensive then. He turned his attention back to Keanu with a sneer that twisted his features. Told Keanu that he was standing in one of the most exclusive dealerships in the entire city. Pointed out that the cars on the floor cost more than most people earned, and a lifetime. His tone was dripping with condescension. Told Keanu that looking was free, but that he should be careful not to scratch the paint because he probably could not afford to pay for the damage of few of the nearby customers. Stop talking to watch the interaction. Were wealthy individuals dressed in designer clothes, holding expensive cups of coffee, looked at Keanu with curiosity and a little bit of amusement. It seemed like they were enjoying the floor show. Keanu ignored the stares and the snickers. Was used to being judged, but usually it was by movie critics or paparazzi, not by a car salesman. Decided to try again. Asked Victor if the car had a specific type of engine or if it came with a manual transmission. Here was genuinely interested in the mechanics of the vehicle, but Victor was not interested in answering questions, was only interested in asserting his dominance and humiliating someone he considered to be beneath him. Took a step closer to Keanu, invading his personal space in an aggressive attempt to intimidate him. Told Keanu to stop pretending. Said that guys like him always came in here to dream and to waste the time of serious salespeople. He told Keanu that he should just go down the street to the used car lot where he belonged. His words were harsh and meant to sting. Keanu looked at the man's face and saw nothing but arrogance and insecurity. Realized that Victor was a bully who got his power from making other people feel small instead of getting angry. Keanu actually felt a sense of pity for him. It must be exhausting to go through life treating people so badly just to feel good about yourself. Keanu remained quiet for a moment, took a slow breath, and kept his hands loosely by his sidesh. Did not clench his fists or raise his voice, simply looked Victor in the eye and told him that he was seriously considering buying the car. He said that he was ready to make a purchase today if the conditions were right. This statement only made Victor laugh harder. Threw his head back and roared with laughter, causing even more people to turn and look, wiped a fake tear from his eye and shook his head, told Keanu that he had heard every excuse in the book, said that listening to broke people pretend they had money was the funniest part of his job. Victor was enjoying the attention, had an audience now, and he wanted to put on a show, raised his voice even louder, making sure everyone in the showroom could hear him. Told Keanu that credit checks were required for everyone. Said that he was sure Keanu's credit score was probably lower than the temperature. Outside, a crowd of wealthy onlookers chuckled at the insult. It was a cruel room to be in. Air was filled with judgment and superiority. Keanu stood alone in the center of it, like a rock in a rushing river, did not look around at the laughing crowd. He kept his eyes focused on Victor, asked Victor once more if he could just see the brochure or the specs for the car. Was trying to be reasonable in the face of unreasonable behavior. But this only annoyed Victor. Did not want to be reasonably. Wanted to win, wanted to force this intruder out of his pristine kingdom. Victor suddenly reached out and grabbed Keanu by the arm. His grip was tight and rough. Told Keanu to stop touching the car, said that the oil from his hands might ruin. The finished physical contact was shocking and uncalled for. Victor pulled a handkerchief out of his pocket and immediately wiped his own hand. Where he had touched Keanu was a gesture of pure disgust, designed to inflict the maximum amount of humiliation through the handkerchief on the floor as if it were now contaminated. Keanu looked at the handkerchief and then back at Victor still, did not raise his voice, did not shout or threaten to sue, just asked Victor to let go of his arm. Victor released him, but gave him a shove backwards, told Keanu that he was banned from touching anything else, said that he should leave before the security guards were called to physically remove him. Situation had escalated from rude insults to a physical confrontation. Bystanders were no longer laughing. Some of them looked uncomfortable with the violence. He looked away, pretending not to see Victor, stood with his chest puffed out, looking triumphant, thought he had won. Her thought he had successfully scared off the poor-looking stranger and protected the sanctity of his dealership. Had no idea that his behavior was being watched by cameras and by people who understood what real character looked like. Had made a terrible mistake in judging the book by its cover, but his ego was too big to let him see. The truth was blind to the reality standing right in front of him. Sneered one last time and told Keanu to get out, pointed a finger towards the glass doors. Keanu stood there for a moment longer, adjusted his jacket, looked at the beautiful black car one last time, looked at the salesman with a sad expression. He reached into his pocket. Tension in the room spiked as everyone wondered what he was going to do. Was he pulling out a weapon? Was he pulling out his wallet to prove them wronger? Was he simply going to lefty? The moment had arrived where the balance of power was about to shift. Dramatically, his shove caused Keanu to step back slightly, but he regained his balance. Immediately, Victor stood there with his chest heaving slightly from the exertion of his anger as his face was flushed. A deep shade of red, and the veins in his neck were bulging visibly. Looked like a man who was used to getting his own way through intimidation and volume. Looked around the showroom to see if anyone was going to challenge him, bet the other customers remained silent. Some were looking at their phones, trying to pretend they were not witnessing the cine. Authors were watching with a morbid curiosity, wondering if the fight would escalate further. Younger salesman who had been hovering nearby looked terrified and quickly ducked behind a pillar to avoid getting involved. Victor took this silence as agreement fueled his ego and made him feel even more powerful. Turned his attention back to Keanu with a renewed sense of cruelty. Decided that he was not going to just ask Keanu to leave, i.e., was going to make sure that Keanu never felt comfortable walking into a place like this ever again. Took a step forward and invaded Keanu's personal space again, leaned in close so that only Keanu could hear the venom in his voice. Told Keanu that he was a joke. He said that he looked like a bum off the street who was looking for a handooth. Told him that hard-working people came here to buy cars, not to touch them with dirty handchoo's. Words were sharp and designed to cut deep. Wanted to see a react. Handu wanted to see Keanu get angry or cry or run away in shame, but Keanu did none of those things. Simply stood there with his shoulders relaxed and his breathing steady. looked at Victor not with hatred, but with a look of quiet disappointment. It was the look a parent might give a child who has just misbehaved. Bad Lithis' lack of reaction only infuriated. Victor Moray pulled back and raised his voice again so that the entire showroom could hear him. Asked Keanu what he did for a living, mocked his clothes, and asked if he had stolen the jacket from a thrift store. Laughed at his own joke, and looked at the other customers expecting them to laugh. With Hema, a few nervous chuckles came from the back, but mostly the room was uncomfortably. Conditioning hummed loudly in the silence, creating a stark contrast to the tension in the air. Victor was not satisfied yet. He wanted to completely humiliate this stranger, pointed a finger at Keanu's chest and poked him hard, told him that guys like him were a dime a dozen, said that they were dreamers who had no money and no future. AIS said that the world was full of people who thought they were special, but were actually just nobodish, was projecting his own insecurities onto Keanu, was showing everyone in the room exactly what kind of man he was. A man who had no respect for his fellow humans, a man who measured the worth of a person only by the thickness of their wallet. Keanu listened to all of this without interrupting and knew that arguing with a bully was pointless, knew that words would not change Victor's heart. Also knew that the situation was becoming dangerous, could see the security guard walking towards them with a stern look on his face. Victor saw the guard approaching, and a smug smile spread across his face. He felt like the king of the castle. Told Keanu that his time was up, said that he was calling the police to have him removed for trespassing and harassment. Himself looked like the victim, was painting Keanu as the aggressor. It was a classic tactic of someone who is used to manipulating others. Keanu realized that there was no way to de-escalate the situation anymore. Victor was committed to this path of humiliation, was not going to stop until he felt he had won. So Keanu decided that it was time to end this charade. Looked at the black sedan one last time. Really did like the car. It was a fine piece of machinery, and he hated that the experience of buying it had been ruined by such a hateful person, but he was not going to let Victor win, was not going to walk away with his tail between his legs, was going to do something that would shock everyone in the room, including Victor. Slowly reached his hand into the pocket of his worn-out leather jacket. Movement was deliberate and slow. Victor's eyes widened as he watched the hand disappear into the jacket. His body tensed up, wondered if Keanu was going to pull out a weapon, or maybe he was just pulling out a wallet to show off a few dollar bills. Security guard paused a few feet away, watching closely. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Only sound was the low hum of the city traffic outside and the ticking of a clock on the wall. Keanu's hand emerged from the pocket. It was empty. Victor let out a snort of laughter, thought Keanu was reaching for something to defend himself, but he had nothing. Opened his mouth to make another cruel comment, but before he could speak, Keanu reached into his other pocket. This time he pulled out a simple black leather wallet. It was old and battered, just like his jacket had seen better. Victor looked at the wallet with disgust, told Keanu to keep his food stamps. To himself, laughed loudly at his own insult, but Keanu did not laugh, did not even smile. Calmly opened the wallet and flipped through the contenti. Took out a single card. It was a plain black credit card with no markings on the front. It looked simple and unassuming. Victor looked at the card and then back at Keanu, had no idea what was coming. Was still riding the high of his own perceived superiority. Had no idea that his world was about to be turned upside down. Keanu held the card between his fingers and looked at Victor. Spoke in a voice that was clear and steady. Told Victor that he would like to buy the car. Said that he would pay for it in full, right? Victor stopped, laughing, and looked at the card and then at Keanu's face, trying to see if he was joking, but Keanu's face was completely serious. There was no hint of a smile. Silence in the room grew heavier. People started to lean forward in their seats to get a better look. Younger salesman peeked out from behind. The Palarthi security guard took a step closer. Felt a sudden pang of doubt in his chest, but he pushed it away quickly. Refused to believe that this man could afford anything in this showroom. Grabbed the card out of Keanu's hand with a sneer. Told Keanu that if this card got declined, he was going to call the police immediately. Turned on his heel and marched over to the payment terminal at his desk. He swiped the card with aggressive foresight, waited for the machine to beep and decline the transaction. waited to see the message that said insufficient funds was ready to humiliate Keanu one final time, but the machine did not. A pleasant chirping sound, screen lit up with green letters said Apraveddi. Silence in the room was deafening Victor. He stared at the screen in disbelief. His brain could not process what he was seeing. Looked at the name on the receipt that began to print, saw the name that millions of people all over the world knew and loved it. Face turned pale as a sheath's mouth fell open. I dropped the receipt on the desk as if it were on further realization. Hit him like a ton of brickshad. Just spent the last 20 minutes bullying and humiliating Keanu Reeves. Had tried to kick one of the most famous actors on the planet out of his story. Had insulted him, pushed him, and laughed at Hyman. Now Keanu was standing there ready to buy the car without saying a single word about who he was. Reaction of the room began to change. Whispers started to spread like wildfire. People stood up from their chairs to get a better look. Phones were pulled out to take pictures. Dynamic of the room had shifted completely. Victor was no longer the powerful bully. Was the one who was exposed. Was the one who was small. Keanu stood calmly by the car, waiting for the transaction to be finalized. Had not raised his voice. One-Che had not insulted Victor. One-Che had simply let his actions speak for him. Had proven that true class has nothing to do with the clothes you wear or the car you drive. It is about how you treat others, even when they treat you. Poor lithe moment of truth had arrived. Victor turned around slowly to face him. Was sweating. Noah's arrogant posture was ganny. Looked like a scared child who had just been caught doing something wrong. Tried to speak, but his voice cracked, stumbled over his words, trying to form an apology, but Keanu did not look angry, just looked tired. Was ready to finish this and leave. He had shown everyone who the better man was without saying a word. He had completely dismantled Victor's ego. Story of what happened next would be talked about in this city for a long time. But for now, the focus was on the quiet man in the leather jacket and the terrified salesman holding the receipt. Silence that filled the showroom was heavy and thick like a blanket of snow that had suddenly fallen in the middle of a busy summer. Davarian stood frozen in Placeth. Air conditioning seemed to hum louder than ever before as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Victor stood behind the counter with his hands hovering over the keyboard, but he was not moving. Stared at the small screen on the credit card machine as if the words written there were in a foreign language that he could not understand. Word approved glowed in bright green letter sent right next to. It was the name that he had just spent the last 20 minutes mocking and insulting. Name Keanu Reeves was printed clearly on the digital receipt. Victor felt a cold chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the cool air blasting from the Vench's face, which had been red and flushed with anger just moments ago, now turned a shade of white that looked almost ghostly. Sweat that had beaded on his forehead from his aggressive outburst now felt cold and clammy. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out at first. Looked from the screen to the man standing calmly by the black car, looked at the worn-out leather jacket and the scuffed boots with new. The clothes did not look. Porty looked like the choice of a man who did not need to prove anything to anyone. Victor realized with a sinking feeling in his stomach that he had made a terrible mistake. Mistake that was going to cost him much more than just a Salah. He looked around the room and saw that the atmosphere had changed. Complete lithe wealthy customers who had been whispering and laughing were now staring at him with looks of shock and disgust. They held up their phones and started recording. They were capturing the moment that the arrogant salesman realized who he had been bullying. The young salesman who had been hiding behind the pillar earlier had stepped out into the open. His eyes were wide with disbelief, watched Keanu with a sense of awe and relief that someone was finally putting Victor in his place. But Keanu did not look like a man who was enjoying a Victoria. Did not have a smug smile on his face, did not look at Victor with anger or hatred, simply stood there with his hands resting gently on the roof of the car, waiting for the paperwork to be finished, looked calm and serene. It was as if the insults and the shoving never even happened. Finally, Victor found his voice. It came out as a weak squeak at first, before he cleared his throat and tried to speak. Normal. I stammered and apologized, told Keanu that he was so sorry, said that he had no idea Huiwash claimed that he was just doing his job and trying to protect the inventory of the dealership. Words tumbled out of his mouth in a rush. Was desperate to fix the situation, was terrified of losing his job, was terrified of going viral as the worst salesman in the world, tried to step out from behind the counter to shake Keanu's hand. His hands were shaking visibly as he extended them, but Keanu did not move to shake his hand, just stood there, watched Victor with those sad dark eyes that seemed to see right through the apology. It was clear that Miana did not believe a word of, "I knew that." Victor was not sorry for what he had done, was only sorry that he had done it to a famous movie star. Keanu had been just a regular guy with a black card. The apology would never have happened. Eth's silence stretched on again, making Victor sweat. Even Moray tried to offer Keanu a bottle of water, tried to offer him a discount on the car, tried to offer him free maintenance for Life High. Was throwing everything he could think of at the situation, hoping to bribe his way out of the hole. He had dug for himself at Keanu, ignored all the offers. She was not interested in free things, was not interested in Victor's groveling, just wanted to buy the car and leave this toxic environment. Looked at Victor and told him to stop talking. Said that the deal was done, and he just wanted the Keisha's voice was quiet, but it carried a strength that made Victor stop immediately. Victor nodded his head, frantically fumbled with the printer to get the receipt, held it out to Keanu with a trembling hand, expected Keanu to snatch it away or to yell at him in front of everyone. Instead, Keanu took the paper gently. I looked at it for a moment. He did something that no one in the room expected, did not sign the paper. He looked past Victor and towards the back of the showroom, where the young salesman was standing. Keanu raised a hand and beckoned the young man over. His young salesman looked confused, looked at Victor, who was glaring at him with a look that said, "Stay where you are." But Keanu instead told the young man to come to the desk. Young salesman walked over slowly, was terrified of Victor, was worried that he was about to get fired for some reason, but when he reached the desk, Keanu gave him a small, kind smile. It was the first real smile anyone had seen in the dealership that day. Keanu turned to Victor and told him that he would not be signing the receipt under his name. He said that he wanted the young man to handle the rest of the transaction. Victor was stunned, started to argue, said that he was the senior salesman, said that he had already run the carta, said that the commission was his by rights. Arrogance was peeking through again despite his fear, but Keanu shut him down with a single look, told Victor that he had treated him with disrespect and he did not want to do business with him anymore. Said that the young man had been standing nearby and looked like the only decent person in the building. Said that the young man would get the commission for the Salith room. Erupted in whispers. People were nodding their heads in approval. It was a power move, but it was a kind one. Keanu was not just punishing Victor for being a bully, was rewarding the young man who had been bullied by Victor for who knows how long. Victor's face turned red again with anger and humiliation. Had lost the sale of a lifetime. He had lost thousands of dollars in commissional because he could not treat a human being with basic decency, but he knew he could not fight back. Cameras were rolling. He argued with Keanu Reeves. Now he would be the villain of the internet forever. Stood to the side with his fists clenched at his sides while the young salesman stepped into his spot. Young man's hands were shaking too, but with excitement rather than fear. Could not believe what was happening. Keanu handed the card to him, told him to take his time, asked him how his day was going. Young man was shocked. No one had ever asked him that in this place, stammered that his day was good. Now Keanu laughed softly. It was a warm sound that melted the tension in the air. They finished the paperwork together while they worked. Victor stood there, watching. Saw the interaction between the two men, saw the way Keanu treated the young salesman with respect and patience. Sight was a stark contrast to the way Victor had treated Keanu just minutes ago. It made Victor feel it, made him feel ashamed, but it was too late for apologies now. Damage was done. Receipt was printed again, this time with the young salesman's name on it. Keanu signed it with a flourish, shook the young man's hand firmly, told him to keep up the good work and not let anyone change who he wasted. Was a piece of advice that the young man would remember for the rest of his life. Transaction was complete. Black sedan now belonged to Keanu Reeves. Keys were placed on the counter. Keanu picked them up and held them in his hand, felt the cold metal of the keys. It was time to go. Had shown everyone in the room what true Class looked like had shown them that you do not need to be loud or aggressive to be strong. Had shown them that kindness is a power that can disarm even the cruelest bully. Turned around to face the room full of people. He did not wave or Bohé just gave a simple nod. He walked past Victor without saying a word. Walked past the customers who were filming him on their phone, who walked towards. The exed sunlight was pouring through the glass doors waiting for him. He was leaving. The darkness of the dealership behind him bit. Before he stepped out into the bright California sun, he stopped one last time. Looked back at the young salesman who was beaming with happy sand. Then he looked at Victor who was standing alone in the middle of his own defeated kingdom. Keanu did not say a word to. Victor did not need Tohi's. Silence was louder than any shout could ever be. Pushed the door open and stepped outside it. Fresh air hit his face. Sight was over glass doors slid shut behind Keanu Reeves, cutting off the warm California air and leaving the showroom in a state of stunned silence. Sight was the kind of silence that feels heavy and pressurized, like the air before a massive thunderstorm breaks inside the dealership. The atmosphere had shifted. Complete alive dynamic that had existed just a few minutes ago, where Victor was the king of the castle and everyone else was beneath. Him had shattered into a million-piece. Victor stood alone near the counter. His hands were trembling so badly that he had to clutch the edge of the desk to keep himself up. Rotha's face was a mask of humiliation and confusion. Matt looked at the spot where Keanu had been standing just moments before it. It seemed unreal to him. Had spent his entire career believing that money was the only thing that mattered. Believed that if you dressed well and spoke loudly, you commanded respect. He had built his entire personality around the idea that he was better than the people who walked through those doors with less money in their pockets. But in the span of 5 minutes, a man wearing old clothes and a quiet demeanor had completely dismantled that belief system without even raising his voice. Keanu had not used his status to intimidate had not used his money to humiliate Victor in return, had simply been a decent human being, and that decency had acted like a mirror, showing Victor exactly how ugly his own behavior really was. Silence in the room was broken by the sound of a throat-clearing gani of the customers. A wealthy man in an Italian suit put his phone away and walked towards the exodus. He passed Victor. He stopped and shook his head. Told Victor that he was disgusted by what he had seen. Said that he was going to cancel his order and buy his car from a different dealer's. Another customer followed him. Then another, owned by one, the people who had previously laughed at Victor's jokes or ignored his rudeness were now voting with their feet. He walked out of the showroom doors into the bright sunlight without looking back. Word was already spreading across social media. Videos that people had recorded on their phones were being uploaded to the internet. Headlines were being written. Dealer bullies Keanu Reeves and regrets it. Instant live internet was about to explode with the story bot. In the quiet of the dealership, the fallout was immediate, and personnel. Victor watched his customers leave. He knew that his boss was going to see those videos, knew that the general manager was probably watching them right now in his office. Monitor tried to salvage the situation. Turned to the young salesman who was still holding the paperwork with shaking hands. Victor told him that he needed to fix these, ordered the young man to call Keanu back, said that they could offer him a free upgrade or a refund, anything to get him back so Victor could apologize properly and save his own skin. But the young salesman did not move. Looked at the contract on the desk, saw the signature at the bottom. It was a signature that was going to change his life. With commission from this one sale was more money than he made in 6 months. It was going to help him pay for his mother's medical bills. It was going to help him go back to school. But more than the money, the young man felt a sense of pride that he had never felt before. Looked at Victor with a newfound courage. Told Victor that the deal was done. Said that Mr. Reeves had left and he was not coming back. Said that he was going to file the paperwork under his own name, just as Keanu had requested. Victor's face turned purple with rage. Lunged forward to grab the paper, shouted that he was the senior salesman. Shouted that he ran this floor. But the security guard stepped in between them. Same security guard who had watched the whole scene unfold. Looked at Victor with cold eyes and told him to step back. Told him that the customer had requested. The young man handled the deal, and that was how it was going to be. Victor Froza realized that he had no allies left, was surrounded by people who had witnessed his cruel. Manager's door opened, and the general manager walked out. Did not Look Happy looked at the empty showroom, looked at the sales floor where the customers had been, looked at the viral videos playing on a tablet that one of the salesgirls was holding. Then he looked at Victor. Conversation was short and quieter. Was no shouting. The manager simply pointed towards the employee. Exit. Victor tried to explain, tried to say that it was a mistake, tried to say that he did not know who it was, but the manager held up a hand to stop him, said that it did not matter. Who the customer was said that Victor had treated a human being like trash, and that was not how they did business. Victor hung his head, walked towards the exit, walked past the young salesman who was carefully placing the papers into a folder. Walked out of the building, into the alleyway, did not have the roar of a sports car to drive away in, did not have the respect of his colleagues. He had was the sound of the heavy door clicking shut behind him, symbolizing the end of his career. Meanwhile, outside on the street, the sound of the city was alive, and loud. Keanu Reeves was already a few blocks away. He had not gotten into the car yet. He had decided to walk for a while to clear his head, breathed in the exhaust fumes and the smell of street food, and felt more relaxed than he had in the showroom. Did not feel angry about what had happened. Addie felt a sense of sadness for Victor. Knew that people who treated others badly were usually unhappy. Deep down knew that true happiness came from kindness and connection. Saw a man sitting on a bus bench, playing a beat-up Keanu. Stopped and listened for a moment, reached into his pocket and took out a few dollar bills, walked over and dropped them into the open guitar cassette. The musician looked up and smiled. Did not recognize Keanu Reeves, the movie star. Just saw a kind man in a leather jacket who appreciated his music, thanked Keanu, and Keanu nodded and kept walking. This was who he was. Buying a car or walking down the street. His life was not defined by the things he owned, but by the way he treated the people he met. Back at the dealership, the young salesman walked out to the parking lot. He held the keys to the black sedan in his hand, was going to have the car delivered to Keanu's home later that afternoon. But for now, he just stood there, looked at his reflection in the window of the car, stood up a little straighter, knew that he would never treat anyone the way Victor had treated Keanu, knew that dignity was more important than money. Sun began to set over loss. Angela's sky turned orange and purple, casting long shadows across the street. Story of what happened that day would be told and retold. It would become a legend, a story about a hero who did not need a cape or a sword, only needed a credit card and a good heart. It was a story that reminded everyone that you should never judge a book by its cover, that the most expensive thing in the room is not the car or the suit, it is the character of the person standing in it. Victor went home that night and sat in the dark, saw his own face on the news, saw the comment sections filled with people calling him a bully, realized that he had lost something far more valuable than a commission. He had lost his self-respect, and that was a much harder thing to win back. While the city slept, Keanu rode his motorcycle through the canyon roads. Wind rushed past him, felt free. Did not think about the car dealer, did not think about the money, just thought about how beautiful the world looked when the sun went down, and he thought about the nice young salesman who was going to have a pretty good week. The engine roared beneath him, echoing through the hillside was the sound of a man living life on his own terms, kimmed humble and relearned. That was the greatest power of all.